We're glad that everybody was able to join us this morning to learn a little bit more about a great feature that we have at mLevel, the internationalization and localization. It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Balcer, who will be hosting today's presentation. Chris, go ahead.
All right. Hello, everybody. So today we're going to go through some internationalization and localization features that we have in mLevel currently, with the intent that we'll continue to grow as we do with everything in the platform. So quickly going through the agenda, what we're going to be doing is kind of defining what really localization and internationalization is, and how mLevel has taken an approach to implement those things. In addition, the considerations and how our approach went in getting there, and any of the concerns that we had around data privacy and geolocation of data. Getting right into it, one of the things that we've noticed really quickly in our business is that one of our real key points with a lot of our customers being enterprise customers have been globally focused. So it's not just the United States-based workforce. So we've quickly found that we needed to go internationally with our product, and therefore having to handle internationalization and localization in some facet. Specifically, with internationalization is really where we started, and I'll get a little more into that as we go into the approach. But internationalization is really the ability of taking what is localization and designing your product to handle that. And in turn, really what you're doing is you're making sure that you're available globally, but ready to then apply the locale information, whether it's language or culture or things like that, which kind of ties to the localization definition, which is really the ability to handle language, culture, locale, and locale generally is thought of in a financial sense or a date sense, where you would normally see numbers formatted in a certain way, or currencies formatted in a certain way, or dates formatted in a certain way. But in our application, that's not really one of our focuses, is really the numbers and dates and currency aspects. So really from our perspective, it's just being able to read text in a friendly way for those users and their different locales. With our application in particular, we found this to be a need really early in the game, because we had a customer that came to us that was a single customer but had users around the world, so 130 countries particularly. I don't recall the exact number of users, but it was a pretty significant user base, and it was a pretty good test for our system. So that really led us down the path of, okay, we need to be ready for the global customer in a very broad sense. So we had to do that in phases as we go, because being a startup, that's really how we have to approach it. And I believe we have a poll question at this point. Sure.
It's up. It should be live.
Okay.
We have translations for English, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. Spanish is coming soon. What other languages would you guys like to see? Results coming in.
All right.
Go ahead. That now. Looks like a lot of people want to speak French, German, and Portuguese.
All right. Yes. They're all left to right. It's good. All right. Good?
Yep.
All right. So one of the things that we had to go into is really start to think of what are the considerations that you have to take into account as you start to take a system worldwide. In our case, we initially came into it thinking, you know, as most companies, our company was based in the United States, everything was based in English. So we really had to focus on English to get things running. So that included our question generation system, our game sets, our actual game display for the users. We really had to kind of make sure that was all working. And I think we got a pretty good base under us, and we started understanding at that point, okay, now we can start to dig into what those pieces are. So these were really the questions we had to ask ourselves. The particularly one is how do we handle different character sets outside of English? And really that's the Latin character sets that you would be familiar with in Spanish, French, German, English, as a few examples. When you get outside of that, you go into more of the double byte character sets, which are your Japanese, Korean, Chinese, where the characters are more of true characters in the sense of imaging perspective. So they do feel like you're kind of drawing a picture more than you're just drawing a text as we see text. So they take a lot more space. So it does sometimes cause limitations on systems, and that was where we really had to understand if we could do it. Next, we had to dig into how do you handle the grammar, because grammar in different languages is always going to be different. We knew right out of the gate from our question generation tool in English there were challenges in grammar, so we knew for a fact when we went into other languages that none of us really are familiar with, it's going to become even more of a situation that we have to deal with longer term. Then the last thing is make sure that the web player that we use, which I would imagine everybody's somewhat familiar with the Unity 3D platform that we actually utilize, make sure that that would be able to handle the display of the characters that we use. One of the reasons for that is we actually have to present things in a 3D rendering engine that is 2D for text rendering so people can read it. And a lot of times that does cause problems with systems, so we had to really dig into that and ensure that we would be able to get down the path of, that's great if we could generate the questions, but if we can generate them and can't display them in the game, it kind of defeats the purpose. Are there any questions at that point?
No questions so far.
All right. And on to our next poll question.
Next poll is, how do you translate your content into other languages? In-house, outsourced? Would you be interested in an mLevel offering, or you're not sure yet? As you're answering those, just wanted to point out you can use the hand icon in your little toolbar there. If you wanted to ask a question, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can type any questions that you have into the chat box, and we'll make sure to either address those over the phone or we can type an answer back to you. It looks like everybody is outsourcing translations right now.
All right. So when we as mLevel decided to take our approach, we had to go and step back at it, at the whole scenario, and look at it and say, how can we bite off pieces of what we have so we don't have to go all in? And one of the ways we did that is based on our service provider, our hosting provider, really provided us with the ability to make our first step pretty natural, which was while we had our systems and our services and our entire platform hosted in the United States, they made it very easy for us to scale our platform to the EU and Asia Pacific regions pretty quickly. So our natural first step was to make sure that we could get our systems up and running in the EU and up and running in Asia Pacific, keep them separated but connected at the same time to be able to abide by privacy laws and different locale restrictions that come with those. And I'll get a little more into that later. Then what we had to do is we had to move on to, okay, now let's check the character sets that we need to support. Initially, we had a customer come to us with a scenario where they wanted to run a new hire conference of sorts, where they would actually do, I believe it was a set of missions that were in Japanese and Korean, if I recall correctly, and we had to ensure that we'd be able to handle those. And now that was not in a sense of the whole entire app being in different languages, but at least making sure that we could actually get those questions into the system and our knowledge base into the system in whatever character set was required. Because, as I said earlier, the Korean and the Japanese character sets are different than what we're used to as being double byte character sets. So it did throw some challenge into the system. So we were able to do that by ensuring that our questions could be generated, ensuring that we could actually put things into the knowledge base, and ensuring that we could actually configure the text that's in the application in the sense of custom text, which is where you would go into the administration console or the mission manager and enter in your intro text or your level configurations in a checkpoint game or things of those scenarios. Additionally, we had to go into the player again and make sure that anything that was generated from the system could actually be pushed out. So if our questions are generated in Japanese, can they get from the database out to the actual player itself and then be displayed and played? It seems like it'd be a trivial situation, but it actually, because of different encodings that are required for that, actually do become a little more challenging. So we went down that path of understanding that. Next, one of the things that we didn't really expect that we came to was really the fact that people around the world read at different levels because their languages are different. Or in our case, there are people around the world that were using languages that are not their first language. So for instance, if you're in India and you're reading English, that may not be your primary language, but you're used to that as the language of business. That occurs as well in Europe and some countries where maybe German is actually their native language, but they're using English as the language that they're using in their company, so therefore they have to understand that. So what we had to do is we had to step back and look at it and say, what can we do to start to handle these cultural differences in a way that will still allow the user to get the exact experience they want, particularly in a game like Short Fuse where there's a timed question. It's not really fair if somebody doesn't really read English on a day-to-day basis to have to push them through a sped-up game. We would put in a time configuration to actually let them slow down the questions and then actually give them the time to digest the information and truly learn the information that we're trying to push through that system. Next, and this is where we started going into probably late last year, was really going into the focus on getting the inside of the application, starting to really focus on that localization. One of those things we were talking through was the idea of the word mission, the word play, the different buttons that are in the app, the tutorials, the login screens, everything within the app that wouldn't be something that generally a customer is going to go into and say, I want to change the play button to say whatever. What we started doing is we decided, let's step back, let's help translate those things into the languages that are required, and then allow them to select the language that they need or detect that, which kind of goes into the next thing, which is detecting from the player, if I'm logged into my phone as an English user, show me English. If I'm logged into my phone as a Japanese user, push down the Japanese text so I see all the Japanese mission navigation and activity information and the tutorials. Now that being said, that is not 100% perfect science, so it doesn't always work that way, but we do provide the ability in the system to use the settings dialog to be able to change your language to one of the languages we support. And I will show an example of that in a bit when I do the demo. And then lastly, and where we're at right now with this, is the ability to do manual questions, which is a feature that is beta currently in our system, but can be opened up for anybody. And really what that allows is it allows us to now not have to generate grammar for multiple languages within a single content grid, but actually be able to go in and have somebody take those questions, export the questions that might have been generated in English because the learning administrator may be speaking English as their native language, send those off to the translator, which, as you all had responded, outsourcing is the way you get things translated. So if you can export your questions, have those sent out to somebody, then pull those in as manual questions in Japanese, in Korean, in Chinese, then you can actually get there a lot quicker than what you had to do before, because it might have been a challenge to get the grammar right if you're doing a simple question template in the way that we had it before. Are there any questions as we complete the approach?
No questions so far.
All right. And I believe we have a poll question.
Next poll, are you planning to build any multi-language missions in the near future? It looks like a good amount of people are, but aren't sure when.
Okay. So moving into the geography component of this. So really, as I said, the first approach or first steps in us going down the globalization and localization perspective Well, it's really understanding where our data needs to reside. And specifically with the EU laws around safe harbor, additional laws that are now popping up in Australia and different areas within Asia, we're starting to see more and more needs to keep things regionally focused or data center focused to make sure that, if there's somebody in Spain, their data stays within Spain. In our current architecture and the way that our system works, and I'm not entirely sure how familiar everybody is with it, but I can give you a little bit of a high level. We do have the concept of customers, and customers actually are where users are contained. With that, while all the users may be set up because, say, we have a company that's sitting in the United States, so the base is in the United States, the learning admin is in the United States, they may load the users here, but they may be based in the EU. As a result of that, there may be basic information which we consider publicly available information, such as first name, last name, email address, that can sit in our authentication systems within the United States. But data such as how well somebody knows something, or how they played in a different system, or whether they interacted with different components of our application, that type of information needs to stay regionally focused or within their given geography. And as I said, I think the most common understanding of it is really the safe harbor laws that the EU has in place, where if you have somebody who's in Spain or in Germany, that data has to stay within those regions. And I believe Germany is actually starting to get even more strict beyond that, with limitations on leaderboards and limitations on whether names can be shown in leaderboards and different areas around that, where it's not just as simple as, hey, the data can't be outside here, but it's also data can't be displayed unless I specifically said that you can display it. And then on top of that, I don't care if you said you can display it, but you can't display my information. But maybe it's a roll-up information type thing where you might want to see a group and say Department X has this score, but you can't see that Jim and John and Jane have actually scored whatever they've scored to relate to that. So it's more of an aggregate. Are there any questions about the privacy or data location information? I know that's a kind of hot topic when it comes to actually segregating data worldwide.
You just want to talk maybe about the 3 areas that we have now?
Oh, yeah. And one of the things that we, to Jeff's point, one of the ways that we really went about this was really separating it based on 3 different components, which, as you can see in the picture with the colors, the Americas, which currently are hosted in the East U.S. data centers for Azure, the EU, which actually contains EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and Asia, which contains Asia and Australia currently, or Asia Pacific. Over time, there may be needs for us to segregate Australia out into its own component or in its own data center, and I believe Microsoft's either there or on their way to creating a data center there because of latency and bandwidth and just general network constraints. Additionally, there's some constraints when it comes to networking around a lot of the Asian countries where communication in and out is not exactly that fast. So they are starting to build the infrastructure with the help of companies like Microsoft to have data centers in places like India, where in general you're looking at 3 to 5 megabit per second connection speeds that are basically the equivalent of our cell networks here. And I think that's really where we're at now. And we have another poll question.
Next poll question is, do you have any intentions of building missions across multiple geolocations? Go ahead and close that poll.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of a mixture of results, but it looks like a good amount of people are going to be building missions in multiple geolocations.
All right. And it's important to understand the difference between the multilingual and the multinational, because it does start to push down our path of understanding where we need data to reside, but also how we need to be able to translate it for people. So now we can jump into a demo, and you can kind of quickly see that there are kind of some examples of how things get translated, where different parts of the application, like where if you look at where you see mission overview, for instance, that's a piece that would be considered our in-app text that gets translated. But then Welcome to New Orleans is actually a mission name that's actually translated as well by the customer to, it's one of your activity or mission configuration settings that you actually would go in and put in yourself. So in this case, these three different screens are all exactly the same thing or same statements, but translated into three different languages. So let me jump into the demo, see how this works. So first I wanted to just show the mission manager just briefly to just show kind of how it all flows together. You can kind of see this is the example of that mission name that you had seen on the other screenshot in Japanese. And it's pretty simple. I mean, in our case, we would get that out, I guess in the customer's case, you would get that information translated from your outsourced provider. Then all it is a matter of taking a spreadsheet or whatever document you get it from them in and then copying and pasting into the different components. And if you look through this, we can see that it's been pretty much every single section has gone through and been translated. So each one of the pieces has been translated, and now when we go into the game, you will see that. Additionally, the learning content has also been translated, so you can see it does have the grid, and it works basically exactly the same way as the other ones would in English. And then the game questions, it's a fairly simple question template, so that is in place as well. Next, we move on to the games, which I need to show them in parallel. Okay, so what this is an example of two different users, and the way we set it up is to have you can kind of see up in the upper right, we created two test users, a user that speaks Japanese, or is me but doesn't speak Japanese and is delegated that way, and English, to just kind of give you a comparison of an apples-to-apples scenario so you can see kind of what's going on. In this case, you can see, again, that the in-app text, like mission N of N, is translated. And you can see this is how it actually formats through when it comes through in our system. So while in English, you would see it this way, you're going to see it this way in Japanese. Let's see. And again, all the menus are translated, which is your in-app text. So one of the things that we've gotten pretty good at is understanding where logout and different selections are, because as we go through to test this, we start to learn different languages by default. One thing that is new here, and I think will provide you some information, is this actually will show you all the languages we currently have available. And as we had talked about a little earlier, we have currently translated in our system, and now this is not what we can do, but what we have currently in system is the English, Chinese, Korean, and Japanese translations. That right there is only controlling the in-app text. So the stuff that you would see that you do not create as the customer, but actually is provided within the game itself. Again, that's your menus, your buttons, your navigational items, your intro or your tutorials and things of that nature.
So kind of the point of that is if you want a different language, all you'd have to do is let us know which language you would want, and we can go ahead and set up translation keys for the localization of the app.
Right. We can work to get those things translated to that language. So what I will do is I'll quickly show you what happens when you do this. So I want to switch it to Korean. Now instantly all the information gets changed to Korean, and now you can see it's been changed over. Now the content though, and that's the key point, the content is not being translated because the content is still based in English. They're two very different pieces, even though it would appear to be the same. And that's really where you manage your content versus us managing the localization of the menus and the in-app text. And I'm going to go back to English. All right. And go over here. And what we can do is show you how the game kind of goes along to show you the different components being translated along the way. So you can see what is being translated as you go into the languages that are specific to the environment that you're in. So this is in Japanese and in English, the comparison of the two. And when you get into the games, it all still works very much the same regardless of the language you're in. Now, this is going to be the trick because you can only be in one web player at the same time. But you'll see now the question is in Japanese. Of course, you'll never see this. There's no guarantee that I'll see the same question over here. But you get the idea that there are questions in English and questions in Japanese, and you can go through and get lucky and answer the question in Japanese when you don't know it. And I believe that's it. Are there any questions at that point?
No questions so far.
Great. So if you have questions, go ahead and click the little hand icon in the control panel, and we'll go ahead and unmute you, or go ahead and type any questions that you have in the chat box. Give a minute or so for people to respond to that.
I do think we have one more poll. Are we ready for that?
Yeah, let's go ahead and run our last poll while we wait for any questions.
What other geolocations besides US, EU, and APAC would you be interested in having data centers at? All right, guys, we need some votes here. 0% have voted.
Apparently we have it covered. Everything that they want, we're getting, which is okay.
All right, we got a few votes in.
Winner is other. Great. Have we gotten any questions yet, or?
No questions.
All right. We'll go ahead and wrap it up then. Chris, thanks for presenting. If you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to your account managers. We'll be happy to talk with them about any questions that you have and get some answers back to you.
And we'll also be publishing a blog on this topic in the next day or two, so keep a lookout at mLevel.com for additional information. It's a good recap of what Chris just discussed today.
Great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.